So we had lots of focus on x86 so far. Now we're going to have a couple of videos, short videos, looking at processors that are developed for a different segment of the market. So first we're going to look at the remainders of Sun and Spark that was acquired by Oracle, and now is focusing heavy on doing specialized hardware for throughput and commercial computing, specifically towards databases. So this was a Hot Chips conference is in the summer every year, and that's when new processors are introduced, sometimes before they even are introduced out in the market. And so I'm going to talk about the presentation here given at the Hot Chips conference about the new Spark T5 processor, and then later on I'm going to talk about Intel's Knights Corner processors in the next video, but they are pretty much announced at the same time. So first, so even before multi-core was a given hit, Sun Microsystems had a version of Spark called Niagara, not Viagra, Niagara, T1, the first version of Niagara, so already in 2005. And it was really targeting transactions as in web servers and those kind of workloads, as well as databases. So they were banked on the fact that it's a highly parallel problem that we're working on. Highly parallel in that if it's a web server, you can handle all the different web connections. They are parallel activities, so they inherently has lots of concurrency or parallelism in them. So they banked on the fact that there's lots of parallelism and very little locality. So one of these web transaction is going to run for a little while, grabbing some data, and it's going to go to sleep, and then comes again and it's going to attach some other data. So you're not going to have enormous amounts of data locality, but maybe you have lots of data volume, but not so much data locality in those applications. So they actually went for a design where they had small cores. Their cores were so small and simple that they almost corresponds one-to-one to the kind of pipeline implementations we discussed in this course. They had 5-stage pipelines compared with Intel's maybe 15-stage pipelines these days. They were running at 1.2 gigahertz, not super fast either. So many cores not running very fast. Well, we've heard that before. That was a great way to save energy back then. And inside each core, you had 4 interleaved threads. So we were referring to Niagara already when we talked about the SMTs as well. So these are round robin. They are hardware scheduled in a fairly simple way. So they are there pretty much to overcome the fact when you to hide the latency, the effects of the latency when you are missing your cache and you have to go all the way out to memory. So lots of threads. So in this design here, you needed 32 threads to make this chip happy. They are fairly cheap on the memory side, and I think actually they had 3 megabytes of L2 cache altogether, running 32 threads. So the cache capacity per thread was very low. 3, that's a funny number as well, 3 megabytes. And then they had lots and lots of memory bandwidth. They had 4 DDR2 controllers, so coming to 25 gigabytes per second of off-chip DRAM, because they were going for a specific part of the market. So the follow-on of that process, that's what was announced at last year's supercomputing, Niagara T5, so the 5th generation of that processor. Now they are at 16 cores compared with 8, so that's not a biggie. They are running 8 threads per core, so a total of 128 threads per chip. They have now gone from their in-order 5-stage pipeline, single issue 5-stage pipeline, to a 2x superscalar out-of-order pipeline running at 3.6 gigahertz. So you actually have seen quite a lot of improvement here. They are still fairly low on cache capacity because their workload doesn't benefit all that much from it. So they're still at 64 kilobytes per thread. That's a fairly low number. Compared with the servers I built at Sun Microsystems, we had about up to 8 megabytes per thread running, and they are down to 64 kilobytes per thread. They have something called glueless multi-socket one-hop interconnect. So this is similar to hypertransport or QPI. It's a coherent world, so they can have up to 8 multi-core chips connected together in a globally coherent way. And they have added lots of hardware accelerators, specializing in areas that are important to their workloads. So this is a marketing slide that I got from them, where they're just highlighting what kind of hardware support they have in their chip compared with the competitors. So they put lots of encryption in here, lots of hash function and random number generators, and of course hash functions. So this is very good for databases and encryption. Also for these kind of commercial workloads, encryption is important. You shouldn't. This is a marketing slide. The competitors, both IBM as well as Intel, they have also added lots of support in these areas since this slide was made. It's once more, it is a marketing slide. So this is how they show their glueless interconnect, so sort of a hyper transport on steroids. They have 7 links going out from each chip. They are proud of their bisectional bandwidth. So when you look at these kind of interconnects, if you cut it in half exactly in the middle, then you count how much the upper half can speak to the lower half, how many bytes per second you can send. And in this example, it's 840 gigabytes per second. It's absolutely unbelievable number. And then, of course, you have lots of your scaling the DRAM. So it's interesting to see what they are pushing in the marketing slide here. Since they have so much bandwidth on each chip, and they have 8 chips together, they can do more than 1 terabyte per second of the peak performance. And then they have lots of bandwidth to I/O, which is also important in the database world, because lots of the databases, of course, have to access the enormous database all the time. So you have a I/O bandwidth which is 256 gigabytes per second if you do this. So once more, these are marketing numbers. This is what the chip looks like. So as I already said, they had a fairly small L3 cache. So a very small portion of the chip is devoted towards L3 compared to the part of the chip which is devoted towards PCI, the I/O bus. And then you have the 16 cores sprinkled out with the cookie cutter again. And then you have, I assume that this is, they haven't shown the area for specialized hardware here. So I assume it still doesn't occupy such large space. So one thing I should stress here as well, and this also comes out of their marketing, is they do a big thing about DVFS, dynamic voltage frequency scaling. So they try to figure out how utilized this chip is, and if it's not fully utilized, then they start running at a slower frequency, and they can lower the voltage a little bit still and save energy in this. And this is something which is also coming more and more in the commercial world, that you dynamically adjust the frequency. You can't really count on the fact that the CPU will run at its maximum frequency all the time. It will adjust its frequency depending on how the workload is what kind of pressure it's been under from its workload.